pulled up online and those kinds of things. And it's interesting. You have we started that way, talking about helping people think better, because you call your production company Thinking Man's Films, and I think, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And so,
and to join his group, you become a thinker.
That's right. And Ann and I are thinkers because we're on board.
So we're officially thinkers.
So, but that was such an, to me, that was a very intriguing name, for your company. And so I was going to ask you, just throw out real quickly before we go too much further, why Thinking Man Films? What caused you to use that for the name of your company?
Well, I think names are important. In the Bible, when someone was given a name, it meant something. And
Yes.
And in this particular case, as this company was being born, one of the realities was that it was built around my own life, in the sense that as I was a person who asked questions, and I started to understand that today there's a lot of people that don't want to think, and they want to be I don't know if you know this, but the word amusement, I think amuse, I think, means not to think. Muse means to think. So we're living in a culture that basically doesn't want to think. And there's a time when you can relax. Like, that's what the Sabbath is about, right?
Right.
To take the Sabbath and not to be pressured with the cares of the work and all that. But what ends up happening, I think, is that there are important, in principle, there are important things in life that we need to think about. And for example, where do we come from? Why are we here? Where am I going? And as I've gotten older, you realize just how short life is. You see those coffee cups that say "life is short,"
Yeah.
But I think that then you have to think about, well, where did all this come from, and where is it going? Where am I going? And I think Thinking Man Films became a wonderful title for our company, the documentary side of my work, because I was asking people to think. And I remember when I first started working on these films, they are very complicated at times. And I was praying. I said, Lord, I don't have all the answers. And he said, well, you don't need to have the answers. You need to have the questions.
Yeah, good idea.
And so
good point.
So I said, Lord, help me to have the questions. And that's what we build our films around, is questions.
Well, and your films are incredible. I mean, you've produced and directed a film on the Moses controversy, on Exodus, and these are biblical themes. I mean, these are mighty biblical themes and issues that you are addressing in your films. And it took courage, it took a lot of hard work and money and all kinds of things like that to produce the quality of films that you've produced. And so you have another one coming up. Red Sea Miracle, and we've seen the first two a couple of different times, and we're just really thrilled about this one that's coming out February 18th in theaters, and so we're really excited about it. Ann?
Well, and Tim, I know that one of the things that excites me is that you take the archaeological record and the biblical record, and you investigate into that and find where they match. And
right.
that is so cool. We've had you on before, so if you want to go back, if you guys want to go back and see the interview we did back in April of last year, we interviewed Tim about the upcoming movie, actually, we had just seen the Moses controversy at the movie theater, and then we interviewed you after that, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, because I have so many interviews at times that I can't place them all.
Yeah, so that was exciting. And before that, it was the Exodus. And so we love them. And this new one is going to be February 18th, right?
That's correct. Yes, the Red Sea Miracle. Now, what's interesting about this is that this film was the one I started with 20 years ago. It's the one that I thought I was going to be making. And these films have taken a long, long time to produce. In fact, one time I was sitting in church after the first year and sort of confessing, I said I was sort of to myself and the Lord, I was like, Lord, forgive me. I feel like I'm a liar. I said I'd be done with this in a year, and I said, I don't know. I have no idea even how to make this film. And I felt like something spoke to my heart, like the Lord spoke to my heart and said, these films will be done when I say they're done, not when you're tired of working on them. What you're building is a fortress, not a facade. If you build a facade, people will knock it over. But if you build a fortress strong on all sides, as it rises up into the culture, people will attack it, but they won't be able to destroy it. They'll just have to deal with it. And I think that the films that we started making have multiple viewpoints. And I think that the strong on all sides was building the different viewpoints. And those viewpoints allow then the viewer to basically hear the information and actually make a life-changing decision. A decision to say, there is a pattern of evidence that matches the Bible. And it's right there, and it's in the right sequence. And so that Exodus film established the presence of the Israelites, and it also established the conquest of the Promised Land. The next film, The Moses Controversy, established that Moses had the ability to write. And not only that, but this writing system of all of the basis of our alphabet shows up, is first found in Egypt, in the very location where our first film shows that Joseph and his family lived. Mm-hmm. So what you're seeing is that somebody who was not Egyptian took hieroglyphics, modified them into what became Proto-Sinaitic, and I think early form of Hebrew, and many others think that, and that became the basis of all alphabets. And why is that important? Well, in order to know God's word, you have to know how to read it. And then Moses, wrote the Torah. And so we had to basically connect all those dots. You could have other writing systems, but the average person didn't know how to read them. They were kind of a barrier to knowledge because they were very sophisticated. Only kings and scribes and people of higher education had knowledge. But with an alphabet, God allowed the common person to actually be able to read and write. And that's what Moses commanded the Israelites. He said, write these commands on your doorposts. Mm-hmm. And that was our second film, was the Moses Controversy, showing that Moses had a writing system. And it shows up at the time of Joseph, and it would have been available to Moses to identify and write down an eyewitness account of the Exodus journey. That was our second film. And now our third film, The Red Sea Miracle, which we're excited about on February 18th to release, and it's over 800 theaters as a Fathom event, is coming out. And that film is so big that it's going to take two films so it's a two-part feature event. The first is in February 18th, and the second one is May 5th, and it's The Red Sea Miracle.
Well, we're excited about that one coming out. I've as we thought about this, Ann and I have talked about this a lot, and just the fact that you have addressed major themes, major important events in the history of God's people, the Old Testament, and this, I don't know if there's one bigger than this one. The thing is, one of the things that intrigued me was the fact that once you begin addressing a particular issue, often it's like peeling off the layers of an onion, to use an analogy like that. But the thing is, you uncover more things, and so it's not just the fact that you're addressing the issue of where did they cross, then you say, well, did they cross? And then you say, well, did they ever leave? And so there's so many questions that are thrown out there that come out that probably would have just continued the work that you had to do on the film to get to the place where you could really put it together to make a major statement.
Yes, it took this last 20 years, I think, with potentially hundreds of interviews and hundreds of trips into multiple parts of the world to basically start to have an understanding, as you said, peeling off layers of the onion. There are sometimes when I would do an interview with a scholar, let's say in England or in Israel or somewhere, and I wouldn't know what they were talking about at the time, not until 2 or 3 years later, when they were saying something that connected with someone else. And what ends up happening is that the role that I've been able to have as a builder, if we talk about building something, is there's lots of bricks out there. that are just sort of sitting around, that people have spent a long time carving this brick of information. But it has to be built into something. And as a builder, as someone who's building a fortress of truth or knowledge or understanding, I'm able to take and find these different bricks and then assemble them together so that in a film, it's scene by scene, line by line, the verse by verse. When you say Rahab, for example, Rahab in the story of Jericho, there was a portion of the wall, the Bible says, that didn't fall down because she was protected the spies. Right. And what do we find? I bought this book that was from 1900s, and with the actual drawings of the Germans that went there, and you can see that portion of the wall that didn't fall. And you start to do these interviews, and you start to realize that all these different pieces are interconnected. And so the testimony of the fact that when the walls of Jericho fell down, one portion didn't fall, that's exactly what was found thousands of years later when they uncovered the wall, that one portion of this wall was still intact. And that could have been where Rahab lived. And so all those little patterns of evidence start to build the case, and you put them in a sequence. And so between the name Thinking Man Films, what I'm calling people to do is to become thinkers. Don't be caught up in the sort of the entertainment that causes you not to think about the things that God has done, not to think about the things you're supposed to do because he created you. And I think that there are many things that people are supposed to be doing now, but they're kind of trapped in an entertainment world. And they're entertaining themselves when they should be working. Jesus was very busy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
no, I was going to say Jesus kept saying he was quite busy. He had to do the work of his Father. And I think we have work to do too.
Well, and you've been doing that, Tim, and I know that all those interviews, talking with scholars and archaeologists from all different realms, which took such a long time, really enlightened you so much, but also discouraged you in a lot of ways at times. And it's been quite a journey you've taken over the last 20 years. I know that Jim wants to ask you questions about, when you interview different people, when we come back from break, he wants to know, like, you talked to archaeologists that said one thing and looked at the record and had one opinion, and archaeologists that looked at the record and had another opinion. And so one of the things that just the fact that you can look at all this archaeological evidence on your movies, and that's what was so exciting. But we also want to know how we also don't be fooled by just what people say, but to also look. And so that's one of the things you wanted to ask him, right, Jim?
Yeah, and we'll get to that. We're up for a break here in just a minute. But let me just say that, we are so impressed, Tim, and for the audience's sake, for people who haven't seen it, the way you have put everything together is so understandable. Even if you don't know a lot about the Bible or archaeology, you can follow these films because they're so well put together. They're very, very well done. So anyway, we're going to break. Wants us to bring her down, but she probably just threw on something, and didn't want to come up. But
okay, I don't know how we're gonna. Is your ringer turned down?
Yeah,
okay.
Well, almost all the way down. Yeah.
Is this still on? Okay, I'm gonna talk to Timothy. He's on there.
Oh, okay.
Let him know.
Yeah.
Hey, so the next segment is 6 minutes, just so you know. And Jim, why don't you tell him? That's what Jim was wanting to ask you about. What we right at the close there.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And some of these questions come from the Thinking Man posts that you've made and all, but I think something that would help people is answers to the question, when differences of opinion show up, how do I know who to trust? I thought that was a great question that you threw out, and our listeners might want to have some direction about that, because there are lots of differences of opinion, and so who do you know who to trust? That would be one thing. And then you also suggested that there are tools that people can use to identify weak or biased or faulty thinking, and I thought we might want to talk a little bit about that.
Is there anything, Tim, because we didn't find those questions. I know you were going to send them to us. I couldn't find them. Is there anything specifically you would like us to ask?
I emailed them today.
Good.
But
Bring them right
Jim, I sent them to both of you. But that one article you're talking about, how to, that was from Brian Rickett, and he's the expert on, how to go through that. So I'm not as clear on his arguments. But I will tell you what I found out was, I can talk about it though.
Okay.
Because what I've learned is that oftentimes there's an answer that people give you, which is the pat answer.
Mm-hmm.
But if you keep asking other questions, well, how do you know this, and what evidence do you have? And if you start to poke around a little bit, you realize that it's sometimes a very thin interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
but oftentimes it's just one that they've made, and so you'll end up realizing that it's probably not as strong as they think they want you to believe if you only ask the first question.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I've oftentimes had more than one question for people, and in asking questions around that have allowed for them to back off a little bit. But and so it is about how do you interpret it. One person will say, if someone says there's no evidence for the Israelites at the time of Ramesses,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, yeah, that's correct, I agree with you, because they didn't live at the time of Ramesses.
Right.
The issue then is, but there's plenty of evidence for the Israelites at 1450 BC.
Right.
And they would just say, well, I don't believe that. Well, that's what the Bible says it happened, and that's where the evidence is showing. That's where the pattern is. So you end up. That's why these films are important, because they expose that.
Yeah. I was going to, Ann and I were talking last night, and I was thinking, just playing the devil's advocate a little bit, I wrote down the question, what difference do a couple of 100 years make in deciding when the Exodus took place?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very important, crucial difference, those 200 years, because it determines a lot of different things, but that's kind of along that line too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Well, if it's off, then like major destructions of cities and that are what they use and to determine when things happen. When was Jericho destroyed, and when were other cities destroyed? If you look at that.
I've got to admit, it's getting better, a little better all the time.
And now here's more Getting Better with Ann Beal on 1160 AM KBDT.
Welcome back, everyone. You are joining us today with award-winning film producer, director Timothy Mahoney. Tim, you have worked on film in the biblical archaeology field, authenticity, reliability of Scripture, and really have asked questions that don't particularly depict you're not defending as you ask these questions a particular view. You're just asking the questions and looking at what's coming up in order to make some judgments and some decisions about what history reveals. And so again, welcome to you. We're glad you're here. We had talked during the break just about some tools, maybe a tool that or two that our listeners could use. We asked the question, when differences of opinion show up, and there are many differences of opinion about the interpretation of Scripture, what does this mean, and questions like that. How do I know who to trust? I mean, there's so many different voices out there. Some are liberal, some are conservative, some are in between, some don't know, whatever. But so are there any tools that we can use, any ideas about how to begin, knowing who to trust?
Well, I think that for me, I've had the same question, obviously, of, how do I know when I hear scholars that are sort of, let's say, famous scholars that are saying things, some of them are saying things negatively about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've gone and sought them out and asked them questions. In the last film, there were 3 scholars there that actually grew up in Christian homes and became agnostics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked them, different questions, and researched and learned quite a bit about what they've believed. But what you'll see oftentimes is that there's there's a bit of work that you have to do, homework sometimes, if you want to be honest, and you have to start to understand. And the foundation for me is always, what does the Bible say?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I go back to the Bible and I look and I understand what it is that it's saying, and then I compare that with what other people are suggesting. And if you dig deep enough, what I've learned in some of my interviews, as an example, when someone says that they've got a problem with an event that happened in the Bible, if I ask them a certain number of questions, in the first film, the Exodus, I was told that there wasn't any evidence for the Israelites.
Right.
And what I found out later was that surprisingly later was and I had a crisis of faith when he told me that, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I experienced a crisis of faith. I could have become, we would not even be on the phone and we wouldn't be talking about any of this had I not found an answer to that question. So I came back and I found, actually it was in my edit suite, I was sitting there editing, looking at this footage, and I started to literally weep, because the man said there was no evidence for the Israelites. And I said, Lord, you have to give me hope, what's the reason here? And a thought came into my mind. It was like a chill came into the room and said, everything your family has believed, everything they believed about the Bible, your mother believes, everything you believe is a lie.
Mm.
And I think that there's a number of listeners out there possibly that have had that happen, where they've had a crisis of faith, where they've had a big question about God or the Bible. But let me tell you something. At that moment, another voice came into my mind, and it said, stop editing, get up, and go to your bookcase. And I got up, walked across the building to my office, went to the bookcase, and it was very clear, read that book. I pulled the book out, and it was a book by an Egyptologist. It was given to me. Egyptologist was David Roll, and someone had given me this book a year before, and I opened it up, and the very dig site I was looking at that I had been to, which I didn't know, was written about, and it was telling me about Joseph and the archaeology at the very location I had been at. One interpretation by one man said that he couldn't find the evidence. The other man was saying, it's all there. If you just look earlier, you'll see the story. And that's an example of how one piece of evidence is being interpreted one way by one person because of the time. And so often what happens in archaeology is that if they don't find archaeology at the time that they think it's supposed to be, then they say this isn't connected to the Bible.
Right. And
so,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and so time, that first film was very important, the chronology of things, of when things happen. And that's where we start to see a pattern of evidence for the whole story of the Exodus showing up in the first film.
Right.
And I think you answered the question that you just kept looking and talking to other archaeologists and looking at more evidence, especially all the new archaeological digs and evidence over the last 20 years, even this past year. It's amazing how more evidence has come up, and a lot of people out there don't know about that.
Right. Yes, there's a tremendous amount of new evidence that's coming out that supports and affirms the Bible.
Wow. So when we get back, we want to hear a little more of that for sure. And then we also want to talk about all your resources as well, because not only are there DVDs of the movie, people can find it online, there are all these books and materials to help strengthen your faith. So stay right here.
So did you get
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Are you there, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I answer that properly? I think it was okay.
Yeah, that was great.
I thought that was really a good segment. You did a great job, Tim. I really appreciate that.
Because in the email that we were reading, the Thinker Update, it did talk about how one archaeologist looked at the bones and said what he thought it was. Yes, in Shiloh. And that it was one thing. And then another archaeologist looked at it and he knew enough to say, wait, this is from the right side of the body. And this is also the way kosher is done. And so, he came up with a whole different opinion based on his, analysis of the bones and his study and his background. And, it's amazing that they were looking at the same thing and they had two exact different opinions.
It's kind of the same
absolutely.
way. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it happens all the time.
Yeah. I'm always thrilled when I see a new dig or something going on, and I'm impressed that Israel always excavates before they build, and that's it's just such an important thing. I was going to say too that when it comes to discrepancies, that apparent discrepancies in the scriptures, I was taught that rather than assuming on one hand that it's a true discrepancy and that the Bible has contradictions, to consider that I don't have all the pieces, something's missing. There's an interpretive problem that I'm looking at here, and I need to look further. And it seems to me that in a lot of ways that's what you're doing. I need to look further. There's something else here. I'm missing something. I don't have it all yet.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about the new film because it's very much the Red Sea miracle is really, I didn't know we could find as much. It's so rich. The Red Sea miracle is just how we get here, and why is it important to understand. It's the difference between, and this is very controversial too, is this a big miracle or is it a small miracle? Is it a big God or a small God? Does God act can God violate the laws of nature? Some people say, well, no, he can't. These laws of nature can't be violated. And so we've got, people that you would say that are very, Christian and believe that they believe that God did it, but they're making it into what some believe is a small, a smaller miracle.
Right.
Not that miracles aren't small, but
no, I know.
I mean, a miracle is a miracle, but was it the parting of the sea with walking through walls of water, or was it a shallow lake that wind blew through the night? And that's the task of this next film that's taking on the question of miracles.
Well, let's spend most of the time in this next segment on that, and because I think it's so crucial, and especially for what we're doing today. So
let me do that intro and
yeah,
we'll go right into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Tim, we're just I'll introduce and just say, let's talk about the new movie that's coming out, and then let you take it from there. And then is there anything else that you would like us to do? This is, again, a 16-minute segment.
Okay.
Or will that take the whole time?
It might.
I know.
And it's fine if it does. I mean, we're just...
Now, did you go down scuba diving to see the...
No.
No. Oh, my gosh. So you had people who'd done that, or people already did that?
Yeah, we had people that did that, yeah.
Okay, I'm being cut off. We got to wait. Coming back. All right.
What is the Del Walmsley Radio Show?
Welcome to the Del Walmsley Radio Show, where the hype ends and the help begins. I'm your host, Del Walmsley, and as always, we're working on your financial freedom.
Listen to the Del Walmsley Radio Show Monday through Friday from 11 until noon.
It takes a whole lot more effort to get something started in your life than it does to keep it moving.
Del Walmsley has moved thousands closer to a great life. The Del Walmsley Radio Show is now on 1160 AM KBDT, Monday through Friday from 11 until noon. Listen and move toward your great life today.
To admit it's getting better, a little better all the time.
If you'd like to get better, call Ann right now. 214-810-8255. 214-810-TALK. Now more with Ann Beal on 1160 AM KBDT.
If you call in, we'll let you talk directly to director Timothy Mahoney. So, Timothy, let's just get right to the Red Sea Miracle movie.
Well, this is the biggest film that I have ever taken on. It's actually a two-part film series, and part one is February 18th. It's going to be in over 800 theaters, and part two is May 5th. And this film is covering some big, big questions. And the Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille has been, I think, one of the films that I grew up watching. And as you remember, in that film, when Charlton Heston playing Moses, lifts his staff over. He did a very dramatic, scene where the sea is parted, and there are walls of water on the left and the right, like a canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And so this film investigates the journey. In other words, the question is, where did this miracle happen at? And as you might have heard, the Bible says, if you look in the King James, it says it was the Red Sea. And then later on, people have said it's the Reed Sea. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Yes.
Or Sea of Reeds. Sea of Reeds. And so in the Hebrew, it's called Yam Suf. And so as my films, as I've worked with our team in investigating this information, we go back to this, try to go back to the original and to the sources and understand, well, what happened? How did this happen? So it starts in Hebrew, and it goes from Yam Suf, the name of the sea, and then from there it goes into Greek, which is Red Sea, and eventually I think it becomes what I would call more Egyptianized and becomes Sea of Reeds. And so we were investigating, and I found that there were two groups, two fundamental ways that people looked at this miracle and the journey out of Egypt to what sea. And one I call the Egyptian approach, and the other one we call the Hebrew approach. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're going to be investigating. And we're going to be, what I've also realized is that the Bible is filled with miracles. Right from the, obviously the journey is not, the miracle is not just the parting of the sea, but it's the journey to the sea. There are miracles within that as well.
And there are so many people out there that want to discount miracles. And I've heard archaeologists say you can't prove or disprove a miracle. Is that true?
Well, actually, in part 2, we're actually going to show that you can prove a miracle. In fact, there's thousands and thousands of documented miracles that are proven. There's no explanation, let's say, other than a miracle. And in fact, we're going to take that on. And, our films have lots of recreations. So in this particular case, I'm going to be able to show you what a miracle would look like in an Egyptian approach, which would be a shallow area. You'll be able to see the Israelites passing through that, as well as what the miracle will look like in a deep sea setting. And we explore these two different viewpoints. But they also tell us something as I started to interview scholars about God. And in the scriptures, 3 times in Exodus, it says, and I will gain glory over Pharaoh and his army. And that, we know that the nations trembled and were fearful of this mighty act of God destroying the Egyptians in the sea. And
yes, it's mentioned over and over in other passages.
Yeah. And in fact, the scriptures say, don't forget what God did by bringing you up out of Egypt. With a mighty hand, he brought you out of here. So something's happening. The films that I make, as I had prayed about it, I believe they're films of remembrance and forewarning. Today, if we look at the story of the Exodus, it lives from that time until now. The lessons and the understandings of it are so interesting because, in a sense, the Israelites go through the sea. It's almost like a baptism, right?
Right.
And they come out the other side. And there will be some interesting theological insights in these films that we're going to share with you from the scholars who have studied this. Remember I talked about being bricks, and I get to be in a sense, the person who shapes and builds this mosaic of information and builds this pattern of evidence that you're going to see. And I think I've heard from some that have said this is the most inspiring film that we've made to date. It's powerful, and it's the biggest, I think, in fact, it's the first time that there's ever been a 2-part, epic documentary on the Bible in theaters nationwide ever. And that's why I think, it's important for people, if they want to go see a film like this, they can go to our website, patternsofevidence.com, see a trailer, and they can get tickets. They can find the theater where it is and get tickets. But this is going to be a very inspiring evening to take your Bible study group or your church or your Sunday school class, take your family. This is going to be quite a powerful event. And by the way, we're actually going to be filming the panel discussion for that with Ken Ham. He's going to be on the panel, and Kay Arthur is going to be on the panel. So we've got a number of different people that will be on the panel. Recall them all right now.
We have already bought our ticket.
Yeah, we've got them.
And plan on taking a bunch of people, friends, family, just a bunch of people. But I can tell you that Jim was laughing when you were talking about the different views of the Red Sea. I saw him laughing, and I know because he always felt like when they tried to minimize it so small to just be going across a little part of the water. And he's like, well, how in the world people don't drown by getting their chariots stuck in the
They
mud?
don't drown in a marsh.
They don't drown
usually.
in a
And
marsh.
so I was just chuckling because I've never even seen that portrayed, Tim. And I think it would be, I can't wait to see it because I would think it would portray some vast differences, and really questions would come up in the minds of those who take the minimalist view of that.
Yeah, right. Well, when you start to see the comparison, in order for water to part in a shallow area with wind, it has to be no deeper than 6 feet deep. So somewhere between 3 feet to 6 feet deep is the depths of it. And so that's the challenge. The challenge is that there's scriptures that talk about the mighty depths and the mighty sea. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And it's, I think, going to be, like I said, it's very inspiring because we've been able to do recreations. In fact, today I'm going back into the studio, and we're just going to be watching it one final time and putting in some final special effects and animations and sending it off to get ready for showing in the theaters. So this film, I think, if you've got any relatives that I've seen this happen, it causes them to think and think about spiritual things. We showed this film to an audience about 2 weeks ago, and there were some people that came there with their relatives who were not believers. And afterwards they said, you know what? They were very moved by it. And from that point on, they've been wanting to read the Bible. They've been wanting to spend time wanting to get into Bible study because it's provoked them. And that's not from me. I think that's because God's using this film in a unique way, these films, to fatally strike people with the truth. You know what I'm getting at? In other words, they're struck with the truth, and they know that they have to reconcile with it. They have to think about, what does this mean? If this is true, what am I doing about it? Have I maybe been ignoring God, or I've been ignoring what He wants me to do in my life? But if this is true and my life is brief, I need to be doing something with my life, or I need to turn my life over to God. And we get emails from people that are telling us that that's what's happening.
Oh my goodness, that is so powerful, Tim, and it just demonstrates the divine component to this. I mean, I know it's God's work. He's inspired you to go and put a lot of time and effort and all of yourself into this, just about, and is just harvesting many people as a result of it, I think.
I think that we can't. I didn't know that I was going to be doing this. I just knew that I was supposed to do something. And I think what we know in our lives is there's some things that the Lord has called us to do that we are supposed to do, and we need to be about them. But we can easily become amused. Probably more than any time in history are people able to amuse themselves and kind of be distracted from the things that God has called them to do. And that's a danger, and it's easy to do. But what I would encourage people is that if they want to get inspired and want to have their faith affirmed, and they want to bring others to have their faith affirmed, or maybe get them talking and thinking back about biblical things, this film is going to be a tremendous event. What better place to go than bring them to a theater, buy them a big box of popcorn, and sit down. And I can tell you it's going to be quite an evening. These are events. We've got a pre-show, and then the movies start, and then there's an intermission. So it's like a 2.5 hour experience. It's going to be an amazing experience. I'm going to take you to see things that you've never seen before, recreations and visualizations. This technology didn't exist, back when I first started. So to be able to see, we created the Israelites, we created the tribes, we created the tents and the carts that they would have went in the desert, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud by day, and all the different things, and Moses confronting Pharaoh with Aaron. All these things are recreations that are in this movie. So it's not your normal, as we would say, your documentary. This is a very high-end docudrama, film that gives powerful evidence for the Bible.
Well, and Tim, I know that for us, and we look forward to going, because in the last two movies, what we were so excited about is you show a lot of the public universities that tend to kind of do what a lot of public universities do, which is kind of turn people away from God and turn people away from believing, and they doubt and they doubt and they doubt, or they tell them there's no evidence, which isn't true at all. And I love that you're showing both sides. You're showing all of the evidence and you're showing everyone, and then let the people decide, basically, right?
Yes, that's right. What I've learned is that the films are able to give questions, and then we hear from different points of view, and you're starting to see this pattern develop then that starts to show, oh, the Bible says this. Oh, this was possible. The Bible says this. Oh, look at that. Wow, there's something. How in the world did that get there? You're not going to believe, but from the very first film, I'll just give you a little secret. There's an insight. There's someone who caused me to go on a crisis of faith, who in this next film is an advocate for the story and brings powerful evidence.
Oh,
and
man.
20 years later, it's powerful what you're going to see. And so these films are actually impacting people around the world. That's why we're excited for your area, and for anyone who's listening to this to go to patternsofevidence.com, and they can see the trailer. Yeah. And they can order their tickets. Get them in advance, because there's only one night only. We're only going to be for that one day. February 18th is the one the showing is, and then from there, that's all we can really afford to do is around the nation for one night. That's the focus, and we're excited about, and we're thankful for you, helping to get the word out.
And your website has so much materials. I mean, we also got the DVDs after we saw the movie, so we could share them with others and, direct people to the knowledge. And people are like, I had no idea. And I think even a lot of the scholars didn't know all of the new evidence that you have shown and all of the new archaeological evidence. And so I can believe that. I can believe that that guy would have changed his mind. And a lot of those people over time that have been ignorant of all the research that they didn't get taught.
Yeah, that actually just happened within the past three weeks. We showed this film to some people who had a completely different viewpoint, I believe. After they saw the film, they said, you know what, the scripture is showing us differently. We need to be willing to follow the scripture, and they changed.
Wow.
And I want to be open. I'm just asking the questions. I want to be careful that I don't, I asked the question one time to Ken Ham, and he said, it's okay to ask questions, because lots of young people are asking tough questions. Mm-hmm. We've got to be able to show them that there is evidence for these tough questions.
And you have. Isn't that great? And you're going to keep doing it. So this film comes out February 18th, and it's the Red Sea Miracle 1, right? And then there's the Red Sea Miracle 2 that comes out in May. And so there's two parts, because I could see that it would be so intensive once you got into it. So this movie is a culmination of all your studying and all the research you've done for all the movies. Is that true?
Right. There's more to come. There's a whole series of films, hopefully, Lord willing, they'll be coming after this.
Wonderful. So stay right here. When we get back, Timothy, I want you to let people know what else they can get from you and all the information, even for young children and teenagers, the resources you have. And so stay right here so Timothy can let you know all that. All righty. So, Tim.
Okay.
What do we need to do now? We have 5.5 minutes in the last segment.
Okay. Just looking here. I think we should talk about young people.
Okay.
The church is losing young people. That's why it's important that we have to help them to know that when they hear, they need to know now before they go off to university or before they go into high school that there's evidence for the Bible, because they're going to be told that there's not. They're going to be told that the scriptures are just fairy tales. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think we're getting people to think, starting back to think, because young people are going to be influenced by, their professors, that they're going to think are a lot smarter than their parents. And there's a lot of professors that just can't wait to get kids out of their, away from their parents' mindset.
Yeah.
Well, and I also find that kids who've gone to counseling at their university, or their advisor, I mean, I've had so many parents, even missionary friends actually, who their kids have turned against them immensely when they've gone to college. And and they come back around after about 5 years, or 3 to 5 years. And then they feel so bad, and that the college had kind of turned them away. And it's not the whole college, it's just certain people there, and it's usually those public schools that are extremely liberal. I don't know why they want to do that. But I'm looking at your family Bible study that you have and the Young Explorers Patterns of Evidence. And I also saw that on your Instagram. And all of these social media are patterns of evidence, right?
Yes.
Okay. To direct everyone to that. So this family Bible study pack is with these 5 CDs is pretty incredible.
DVDs.
What did I say? CDs? DVDs.
Yeah, DVDs. Yeah, DVDs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did I send those to you?
Yes, you
did.
did.
And we appreciate it so much.
Yeah, and it covers a lot more, but you break it up. You break it up into the adventure of Abraham's promise, the amazing rise of Joseph, Israelites, the case of the Israelite slaves, and the wicked Pharaoh. Are they investigating? Because we have not watched the children's ones yet, the teenager ones.
Yes, we go on an investigation. They go with me, and we go hunt for that.
And you have it, and you have yourself and the kids in the places. I mean, did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So you digitized yourself into all these locations. That is amazing. Yep. I don't know what they call that. What do they call that?
Well, we have a thing called the exploration chamber that allows us to go into different places. So.
Well, that's one more thing that we're going to need to look at so we can tell people about it. Just saying, we just went over and over and over those trailers, all of your trailers, and we just got so hyped about that and everything. It was great. And so we want everybody to look at the trailers, but also to buy their tickets. And what can they do? I mean, maybe you can address that. I know that works like this are dependent on financial support and that kind of thing, and getting the word out.
We got to do that.
And so we wanted to know
how
to tell people how to do that.
Can you do that, Tim? I will ask that right at the you can do it at the beginning. Yeah, I just want to make sure they know.
They know what now?
How to help fund your
projects.
Projects.
Yeah. Oh, we're still working on trying to.
To admit it's getting better, a little better all the time.
You're getting better all the time. Now back to Ann Beal on 1160 AM KBDT.
We are looking at the Patterns of Evidence Young Explorers series by Timothy Mahoney. It is actually DVDs that actually are more like movies, actually. And it takes the young explorers and Timothy, and they go into a chamber and they end up in these different locations. And it's a 5 DVD packs. Tim, I love these.
I was really impressed to do it. This was for the first film, Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus. We would have families come and young children, and I could see that these were some bright kids that would come up and ask all sorts of questions. They were sitting there watching the first film as 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and they were mesmerized by what was happening, and I could tell that they were thinkers. Now the challenge is that a lot of young people today have questions, and sometimes they don't get them answered, and they go off to high school and they go off to college, and these professors tell them that completely different world philosophy, and they basically the children then feel like, well, the Bible's not true, and I can't believe it because it's not historically true. And so many young people today are leaving their faith because they don't believe that there's any historical credibility to the stories of the Bible. Patterns of Evidence, and we're talking about young explorers, helps to build a basis for that. That's a children's series that we created, and it's also a homeschool product for people who are interested in homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And we have it for both young children and for high school. And we also have a book called The Evidence of Faith, which is a small group study. The Evidence of Faith has questions at the end of each chapter and videos for each chapter, and you can go through that. And that's why is it important that we have a historical faith? And we talked a little bit about why is it important that the Bible is historical. It's not just a group, it's not just good allegorical stories.
Right.
Was there really a Moses? Was there really an Exodus? Well, Jesus talks about Moses,
mm-hmm.
and he identifies that Moses existed, and because of that, what we realize is that some people are saying, well, if Moses didn't exist and Jesus acknowledges, then they say, well, then Jesus doesn't know what he's talking about, and why should we believe in Jesus either?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's all built upon itself, the history of the Bible, and it's the fact that God has a plan. It says he's got a beginning of time, and there's going to be an end of time as we know it, and that his kingdom is coming. And so we've got this short little space as we're, our little planet circling the sun to make a decision. Who will we serve? Will we serve ourselves and entertain ourselves, as it were, to death, as some people would say, entertaining themselves to death? Or are we going to acknowledge that we were created and that we're created for a purpose? And these films, the Patterns of Evidence films, I think, help to establish that the narrative of the Bible historically has a pattern of evidence that affirms the Bible.
Yes.
And
yes.
Tim, I thank you so much for these films, because I never realized how much controversy is out there. I mean, you hear the universities and you hear people say, things like that, but I never knew there was kind of a push to get rid of Moses completely and the Exodus and all that, because if you get rid of that, then you get rid of the fact that even what Jesus said is true. And so we've been very enlightened, and we thought we knew so much. We also have loved your hardback Patterns of Evidence from the Exodus, and I know you have that for the Moses controversy as well, and I know that you have the 5 or 6 DVD set about the Moses controversy with extra stuff in there as well, and you're going to have that for the Red Sea miracle as well, right?
Yes, that's correct. We have these what's called box sets, and they're just
mm-hmm.
for those people that said, hey, I love the movie, but I want more.
Oh my gosh.
We'll
yes.
put in another 7 to 10 hours of additional information in these box sets that just really go deeper into what's happening. So once again, the next big movie is coming out, The Red Sea Miracle, Part 1, February 18th. You go to patternsofevidence.com. That's where you can get tickets, patternsofevidence.com.
And you can learn so much about Timothy on every social media. It's always all called on Instagram, on Twitter, and everything, Patterns of Evidence. And you can follow him by becoming a thinker. And so you'll see all there, you can become a thinker, you can join Timothy, and he sends you these updates all the time for all the new archaeological evidence that they find. And over 2019, I can't believe how many we got, and we learned so much about the new evidence that came out in 2019. And we just thank you so much for that, Tim, and we thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tim. So good to have you again. Great to hear your voice and to get your input today.
Thank you for having me.
And we want to have you back for the next one. So let's plan on that. So everyone out there, go buy your tickets for the Red Sea Miracle, February 18th. Go on patternsofevidence.com, and we'll see you there. Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. And are you going to be at NRB this year?
We are going to be at NRB.
We're making every effort.
No, we were just told it's in February, right? Isn't it in February as well? Somebody said we're going in February, and I'm like, yeah. So we're going.
So well, that's
yeah. So we'll see you there.
That's like next month.
I know. We're excited. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you. Take care.
Okay. God bless you. Bye bye.
God bless you. Bye bye.